Okay. All right. And I just monitor on the side if somebody else is planning to join us a little later. Well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining me to present and have a conversation about project management called Profit Motive and the Business of Design, the Project Manager Edition. We will look closer at KPIs a PM has under his or her control, the project manager duties and responsibilities, and a glance at best practices in the form of tools. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Elisabeth Sporer, and I work as a business strategist and a management consultant and a leadership coach. So over the past 25 years or so, I have been part of about 40 firms as project lead, then as part of the management teams of firms, then the firm leadership teams, and now as a strategy consultant and owner of my own architecture firm. My approach working with clients combines business strategy with leadership coaching. You can connect with me if you want via LinkedIn. I give you my information anyways. You have it. Let me introduce you to my thinking about business strategy. So this is the table of content for the whole presentation. We look briefly at the 5+ key performance indicators, the KPIs, that an A&D firm financial management team usually looks for or looks after. And this is followed by a closer look at the 3 KPIs project managers have control over. And then we'll touch on the top 8 project management actions typically a project manager takes, and look at applied best practices, showcase a selection of project management tools. And of course, we have Q&A. So I encourage you, if you have questions, do ask. I'm fine with being interrupted, in fact. So an A&D firm's business plan is built upon the basics of brand, operations, finance, and design. Basically the operations side is they ask themselves who supports the teams. The brand part of the firm will ask themselves who gets the work. The finance part asks themselves who deals with the money. And the practice and design is about who gets the work done. Or to take it a level further is the operations, that's business practices, infrastructure, HR and IT. Brand is about marketing, people, PR, and proposals. Finance, of course, is about the measuring, reporting, and tracking. It's all the financial exchange, basically, the transactions. And the practice and design is about the best practices, design standards, and presentation schedules. If you want to know more about that, you can follow the events I had. I had a series last year that talked about all of them, and I have recordings of that on my website. I can give you the link to that. So when it comes to firm profiles, the profiles of the entrepreneur, the maverick, and the legacy firm have emerged based on my experience. So the firm profiles are rooted in the founder's values. So the shaded boxes on this map indicate firms I am or have been working with in my 25+ years. So the gray boxes show firms I worked with while in Germany. I was born there and came to grad school here. The orange ones show firms I worked with while employed, and the black ones are all the firms I work with now as clients. And I have actually more, but at some point it gets too dense. But what you see is your firm, ACLA, situates itself at the intersection of entrepreneurs, maverick and legacy firms, which indicates the firm has traits of all the 3 profiles. Oh, the axis, I didn't explain that. So the way it's categorized is the horizontal axis shows the firm in size from 0 to whatever. And 20 is kind of the divide between the entrepreneurs and the mavericks. And the vertical one shows when the firm was founded, from 2022 back to like 1960s and older, and around 2000 is also the dividing line between the legacy firms and the either entrepreneurs or the mavericks. Now, when leading a firm, you look at profit and loss statements, and you receive that from your CFO, and you receive a summary that usually shows following performance indicators: the operating profit rate, the utilization rate, the net effective multiplier or NEM, the break-even rate, cash flow, and accounts receivables. And they also look at the workload and the fee forecast. If you want to better understand what these KPIs or key performance indicators are for firm leaders and how they are calculated and all that, there's a link to a recording in the upper right corner where it goes into a lot more detail than I can do in this presentation. So let's focus on the KPIs within reach of a project manager at an A&D firm. There's the operating profit rate, the utilization rate, the backlog and fee forecast are shown highlighted. The other three are less kind of within reach of a project manager at this point. So the utilization rate is a simple equation. You divide billable hours by total hours, and you hope for a high ratio between 65 and 75% is typical for an A&D firm. And the operating profit is profit expressed as a percentage of net revenues. Now, you may not have access to that kind of information, but you should have access to how many of the hours you and your team spend on a project get billed by the end of the month. So the ratio labor billed to labor spent, which is preferably 1.0 and higher, is a very good indicator of success and even profitability. And lastly, the backlog is not what a PM controls. The backlog is how much work is coming in the pipeline, but the work planning and scheduling that ties into the backlog and the due diligence behind it, that allows much more clarity for the firm leaders. So at an A&D firm's largest expense are payroll and payroll-related expenses. They are within 70 to 85% of the total expenses a design firm has. So a leader of an A&D firm asks usually him herself, so for all the dollars paid to people, how many of them actually go towards billable client projects? So the gross utilization is calculated by dividing the direct labor cost with the total labor cost, or the billable hours over the total hours should give about the same or the similar ratio. And the net utilization subtracts benefits hours from the total hours and gives a much clearer indication of how effective each staff member can be. So let's look closely at an individual staff's target utilization rate. So this shows a junior level staff that works exclusively on billable hours. The gross target utilization turns out to be, as the bottom, close to the bottom shows, 88.5%. And the net utilization target is around 97.5%. How do we get there? I run you very quickly through it. So this junior staff has 15 hours of PTO, 15 days of PTO, and 9 paid holidays. So a typical year has 2,080 hours. The paid holidays are 72. The PTO is 120 hours, which comes to gross working hours of 1,888 hours. This staff member, you tell this person is typically spending about 1 hour a week in overhead related activities like staff meetings or education, meaning the target billable hours are the 1,888 minus the 48, so it turns out to be 1,840 hours. To get to the gross target utilization, you get the billable hours, which is 1,840 at the very best, divided by the total, 2,080. So that's the 88.5%. And the net, you subtracted the benefit hours, which are the paid holidays and the PTO out, and then it would be a 97.5% utilization, very, very high. Because it's like this 1 hour a week that person is not billable and working and billing time towards overhead activities. Is there...
Elisabeth, there's someone in the waiting room.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
I see it. I'll give you another example. So this was target utilization. Now we look at a timesheet of a typical week's timesheet. In this case, it's somebody that staff member works 40 hours a week. 30 of them were billable, 2 of them were overhead, and 8 of them were vacation or PTO, which means for the gross utilization, 30 of the 40 hours are billable, or 75%. But for the net utilization, 30 of the 32 hours are billable because the 8 hours benefit hours are subtracted out. So that comes to a very high utilization of 93.8%. And some firms pay close attention to the net utilization. I am usually very happy to begin with when firms really pay attention to gross utilization and the rates so that people are meeting somewhat the target rates. So why is utilization so important? Invoicing is, as you know, a function of the hours charged to billable projects and is multiplied with your billing rate. So that's expected billings that a firm knows by the end of the month could come together. And a firm usually has also a way of assessing staffing needs because it defines its size, its firm size. It's the number of staff multiplied by their target billing rates and their utilization. So that creates a kind of a minimum billing in a way that the firm will have. So meeting these utilization rates lets the firm really plan how busy you are, how many people do you really need to hire or have on staff to get the work done. So each firm, of course, has a different business model and has individual considerations of how they define the target utilizations per staff level. How much billable hours do you expect, and how much to meet the revenue or profit target, and how much overtime is practical for training, for business development, for other kind of necessary overhead related work like hiring and interviews, etc. But a firm with a very high operating cost will probably aim for higher utilization. I do not know your firm's financial kind of profile, so this is me just giving a general sense of what firms look at and how they go about that. Now, this is a chart briefly that just gives us an example how a firm with different levels might structure its target utilization rates. I would focus more on the gross than the net ones, to be honest. So the most senior level ones heavily depend on how many hours the most senior level is involved in marketing, operational, and administrative duties. And that ranges for principals between 25 and 60%. In this case, assuming that a principal is 20 hours a week billable, it would end up to about 42% target gross utilization. Now, the middle other senior level people might be somewhere between 50 and 80%. Like the senior project manager here in this case, we say has 34 billable hours typically per week, meaning 6 hours would go into overhead activities. That would lead to a 76% utilization. And again, the most junior level one, which has 1 hour a week, would be at 88% utilization. I hope that is makes sense. Now let's go to the next. So we covered one of the KPIs project manager has somewhat control over, how busy do you keep your team? How billable do you keep your team? The next one I mentioned was the labor billed to labor spent ratio. In that case, what it means is like, it's not always good to have high utilization because it depends what kind of contracts you have and how your clients interact with you. Let's say you have a fixed fee contract, meaning you have to get your work done within a certain fee range. If people put in a lot of hours in, you basically have hours spent, but you cannot bill those hours. And that would give a ratio of less than 1.0, meaning poor performance overall. So you want to make sure that if people put in a lot of hours that are billable, that you can also bill them to your client, or you might want to consider other strategies to not lose out on the revenues you could make and burn out that staff member on top of it. Again, the 1.0 and above factor is desirable on that end. So why do you have to care about high utilization and or the labor bill to labor spend ratios? Well, the billings are pegged to firms' operating expenses and revenue goals. And as I mentioned, the payroll is a large component of the operating expenses. So you want to make sure that the firm can cover the increasing salaries that are pretty much the norm nowadays in any professional services firm. And the operating profit on top of it covers bonuses and salary increases, 401k contributions, employee development programs and benefits, purchases, taxes, and profit, which might come back to each staff member as a profit share at the end of the year, or however often the company is considering sharing profits in a bonus form with staff. Now we look briefly at the work planning effort, how that ties into the backlog. So how does a good work plan impact the firm's bottom line? I mean, it's really good for anybody that is involved in the staffing planning of the firm to really know what staff is really needed and what billings can be predicted, so that the most senior level of the firm can literally focus on business development and getting new work rather than the operational aspect of running an landscape architecture firm, excuse me. So we went through the KPIs. Now I'm taking just a step back. Do you have any questions to those? I mean, did they make sense or? Okay. Let's just look at the top 8 project management actions that a professional service firm would expect from its project managers. So here's a list, and we go through each one briefly to explain what it means. There is the be a leader, establish scope and fees, negotiate the contract, develop work plan and build teams, direct project teams and consultants, monitor fee performance, coordinate schedule and construction budget, and of course, communicate. I'm pretty certain these are not new topics for you. You're well aware of them, but let's briefly run through them one more time. When I say understand project firm and goals, it's also that you are the firm's ambassador. And so you should know the firm's kind of elevator speak and fully engage in the firm culture and engage the team you are working with in the culture of the firm and being also ambassadors just as much. So you cultivate that culture in a microclimate. Early on in the project pursuit, you might be asked as a project manager to write or create an outlined scope of services. A project schedule as much as its scope of services. A project schedule as much as, excuse me, I got stumbled. So you may be asked to help also with the fee building. Things to keep in mind are try to define the scope as succinctly as possible and numerically define anything that can be defined with numbers, like the numbers of meetings, the number of deliverables, at which stage do you do deliverables, how complete are they, how many sheets, etc. And have a good project schedule handy at that time as well, I think is critical. Further along, you may be asked to negotiate the terms and conditions for the firm to convert a proposal to an agreement. The steps to be taken at that stage are that you review the legal language of the terms and conditions very carefully, possibly with the help of attorneys and or insurance brokers. Check on the insurance requirements and really double check on scope, fees, and schedule so they are correctly shown in any contract. Another step and you may be asked to develop a work plan to support the fees and build a team with consultants or sub-consultants. The necessary steps at that point are that you define the project team internally and externally. You get their scope and fees together. And then you develop a work plan that shows the hours and the fees for each project scope based that is on each member that is on the team. You can definitely define it most succinctly numerically, but also in terms of task management. I get into that a little later again. So now that we have won the project and we are executing it. So as a PM, you are responsible for the team's performance as much as the firm's culture. You are the spokesperson for the firm with your clients. And as a PM, you work with other PMs to make sure that everybody on your team is effectively utilized and is also engaged in professional development activities and is adapting well to the team and to the culture of the firm. So things to consider are that you should alert your colleagues if anybody on your team is slow or too busy, either way. I would also encourage to watch out for your team to help minimize staff burnout. So make sure that everybody has the right amount of work on their plate, equivalent to also their skills. The outside team needs as much attention. You direct outside sub-consultants, you schedule meetings, you keep agendas, etc. So there's a lot of attention necessary to other individuals in your extended team. Now we also talk about the monitoring of the fee performance. So to make this effort seamless from the beginning, a PM can give all team members a copy of the scope of services and follow these steps. Just hand them out the scope of services, maybe without the fees, but definitely with a number of hours expected to work. Build in some contingency because things are changing a lot, as we all know. Schedule an internal kickoff meeting, and during that kickoff meeting, you share the scope and the work plan with the team to really define a baseline of expectations. And during the kickoff meetings, I would expect that you come to an agreement how you best execute that project, but also listen to concerns team members bring up so that you can adjust them and adapt and adjust the work plan or if necessary to really meet expectations and realistic goals. After that, you're expected as a project manager to do weekly, preferably checks on the fees to make sure that you are on target with the fee burn or fee spending with what you communicated to your client and to your accounting division in the firm, and make necessary adjustments if you see things change. Schedules tend to change a lot, and does it work with the fees you have available? So that due diligence is absolutely critical. Another big topic is, of course, so at the outset of the project, the PM has you developed a project schedule, and after that, you're expected to really monitor it very carefully. And hopefully you made a provision in your agreement, a language that any change of the schedule, not your own fault, of course, would allow you to ask for additional services or change orders. So you're not caught up in having to produce services for free at any point in your project's life. Now, the last one is a very, very big one, communication. I mean, teamwork and collaboration is the most important part of project management. So you are the one that nurtures individuals' growth on a very high level, while also, of course, maintaining a healthy self-care practice. So you have to find the right balance of feeding others while also making sure that you are nurtured yourself. So project management and project managers are essential to the project and the firm's success. As I made the point one more time, going back to the finances. What I would like to do is show you some tools that I have developed in my career working in architecture firms. I work also with landscape architects, and I have deployed them to many firms. To get you a better sense of how you can actually do these jobs. But I'm also happy to listen to any questions. There's somebody in the waiting room. Hold on.
Yeah, I think Andy's finally going to be able to make it in.
Oops. Okay. No questions at this point? Okay, then let's go through the tools. One workbook in Excel that I have been using with most of my clients and firms is a project performance tracker that lets you look at, has different aspects, and a checklist to begin with, and fee summary, work plan for fee building, as much as task management and also the deliverable management to your client. Then there's a resource planning toolbook that lets you monitor really well as to what your staffing needs are and what people are really assigned to. And so you can balance the hours and know the fee burn at the same time. And of course, as a firm, you need to better understand what your backlog are. How much fees do you have in contract, and when do you need to find either more work or more people? So this is an example of a checklist that a project manager would have basically somewhere as part of his toolbook for each project, to make sure that she is doing all these steps and make sure that everybody on the team, be it from accounting to client, really gets the information at the right stage. And this next tool is simply a fee summary for communication with accounting as much as with your client as well. To really, what I would not share with your client, this one is more of an internal tracking, to be honest, because it allows for a markup of consultant fees. If you share it, there's a version to be shared with a client that basically just shows the final fee inclusive of the markup, but it tracks everybody on the team, you plus any consultants you have, by phase or by task, and summarizes them up. And that gives the accounting division in your firm a better basis for monthly invoicing and completeness of scope at certain points. And your client most likely will appreciate if you attach an abbreviated fee summary to your proposal, so they have a better sense of what fees might come up over the lifetime of the project. This tool is meant for if you work with clients that would want to have you give them a very detailed, well, let's say if you have clients that want to work with fixed fees in particular, and you have to develop a fee that you can execute comfortably. So what you would do is you develop a schedule, and you have everybody with a billing rate and a certain number of hours based on utilization on your project for each phase. Like here in the programming, 6 weeks long, you have, it's a big team in this case, or out of the 7 people, 4 are in the initial stages. It gets bigger with each phase, of course. And you multiply the billing rate by the hours per week. Principal is 2 hours a week on it. Over 6 weeks, 12 hours times the billing rate. It gives a fee target for this project. Or you double check maybe a fee that you already developed based on experiences with other projects in the past, and you double check, is that reasonable? Can I really execute that project with that team that I have in mind? And then the next step is when you are executing the project with your team, you might have a work plan that has a list of responsibilities or deliverables that you get involved in, including coordination and such. You have a number of weeks. This is the site analysis phase. It's 8 weeks long, and you have like 6 different levels of team members on your team, and you can assign specific numbers in each week per the task. This spreadsheet will calculate what the fee bearing is if you really staff it that way. And you can communicate also to your team, like the PM is maybe 10 hours a week in the first week involved in unique design investigation, whereas in the next week, she may not do any of that, but another staff member has a higher number of hours doing a different task. And you can add, of course, tasks based on what the reality of your workflow is. And this comes all back from the deliverable by phase checklist that is also part of that workbook. The list pretty much each phase and what is to be expected from each in terms of deliverables as documents, in terms of coordination and project management. So you can also set the right expectations with your team as to what level of completion you expect at certain stages of the project. Which brings us to the next series. It's the resource planning. I'm sure that you have a weekly staffing meeting of some kind in your office to define who's going to work on which project for how many hours in the coming week. If you have a really good system, you look out for several weeks ahead, maybe even months, and have it balanced out as much as you can. So the intent is, of course, to make sure everybody's assigned to teams and project. Nobody's assigned more than 40 hours or 36 hours, depending on how many hours they can bring in. You can also figure out and list who is on vacation, what deadlines are coming up. And you can double check if there's a deadline coming up, if the teams are really staffed up to be able to produce the work for the deadline, and whether the composition of the team really has the right skill combination, like a junior designer to do some renderings, plus the senior designer to doing the detailing, and the project manager to primarily interact with the client and keep track of all the documents and communication that goes back and forward. So what it looks like as a toolbook then is, this has several tabs. It's in Excel again. This tab would be called staffing by project. It would list every project that are active in the firm. It would list each member that is staffed on that project. I'm pointing to the first project on that one and has 4 staff members on it. It would list vertically each column is 1 week. So the month of January seems to show 5 weeks, February and March 4 weeks, because it has to do with the way that the year is not the weeks are not falling exactly on months, but for this kind of spreadsheet, it goes in a rhythm of 544, 544. So this shows the second week of January highlighted. So that would be the active week we would look at if we had a staffing meeting, and I would double check whether this is the right number of hours desired and needed and wanted for the project. It would double check. So let's look at the first project just one more minute. So the anticipated billing of that month would be $41,400 if we keep that staffing level. The black line shows that only $27,500 are available in fees based on fee projections that were produced at the same time. So possibly that project is slightly overstaffed. So I might dial back some of the staff hours, or look whether the deliverable is really possibly a little bit further along so you can bill accordingly. The next tab in the same spreadsheet shows each staff, so staffing by employees. So it lists, each member has, like in black, the number of projects they are assigned to. It also gives whether there is a holiday or PTO in that week. That's if you look at the very first person on the top, the second line gives holidays and PTO. And the third line, if people have a higher number of administrative duties that impact billable hours, I would also take note of that. And so the very top line just shows how many hours are really open for another assignment. So if, like in this case, Abigail seems to have about 1 hour available in the first week, 9 in the second, 1 in the third, and then 9 and 9 again. But I also know there's 2 weeks of holidays in the month of January, which kind of reduced the 9 hours down to 1. Truth is, she's about 9 hours available on average. So that's something to consider, whether she gets staffed up on one of the projects, or is it enough to put her on another project? Is that even doable and feasible in terms of being able to go back and forward amongst different projects? And then there's the last tab that just summarizes how many hours each staff member is really available or overbooked. Any negative number shows these are the number of hours individuals are overbooked, in fact, rather than available. And those are the things I would look typically first when I go in a staffing meeting, or even before I have a staffing meeting, like which staff members have obviously are overbooked or underbooked, and what do we do about that? I might start doing some negotiations before the staffing meeting. If I cannot resolve it, it gets resolved in a staffing meeting with all the project managers involved at the same time. This is another tab, which is just a nice way of just looking at a glance how busy your staff is, because it takes the utilization, and anything in green is somewhat acceptable because it's in the range from 75 to 125% utilization, and that can be adjusted to how your tolerance level. Whereas the yellow shows, oh, these people are definitely understaffed. The blue shows these people are definitely overstaffed. We have to pay attention to that. And that's just at a glance. So that's the staffing workbook. And now we look briefly at the fee projection. So what does fee projection and backlog mean? As a firm, you want to really know how much fees do I have in contracts, so I have the right number of staff to do the work over the course of the next 3+ months. Typically 3 months are rather accurate to forecast. Beyond that gets often less accurate. So the black column in this graph shows all the fees that are in contract from all projects combined that firm has. Whereas the green dashed line shows this is what the firm can produce in terms of fees based on the individuals that are billable with their billing rates and their utilization. So if you have staff members, if you have just a simple example, if you have 10 staff members, each have a billing rate of $150 an hour and they're billable at 75%. So in a month has about 160 hours, you would multiply 160 times 0.75, which is 120, I think, times 150. That means 100. So you would have a billing of 180,000 to be expected just based on that. And then you would compare, that's the green dashed line. So you compare the fees in contract with the fees you can produce. And there's the blue, which is a nice byproduct. It's just anything in negotiation that may come at some point in line is not shown as black, but as blue, as a potential. And once you're done with billing at the end of the month, that orange dashed line at the bottom, you really put a real number in there, and then okay, this month I billed 300,000. I had a potential of 380,000. I thought I had 332,000. Something was not going right. But the next month, in this case, at least it shows like, oh my God, I have more work than I have capacity. So we need to really pay attention. How do we deal with that? And the month after, even more so. I show you briefly the charts that feed that graph, where the numbers come from. So here you would have all the projects. I know it's very small. I go briefly here. So that's the same chart, just expanded. You have each project with all its phases or tasks in it, all the fees in it, and start dates and end dates of each task or phase. And the spreadsheet automatically spreads the fee out then over that duration of the phase with that start date. So you kind of know when to anticipate billing of that scope occurs. And that summarizes it back up here in this level here, where you see the summary level for each project and the potential billing that can occur in each project at that month. And again, that feeds the graph here that shows it overly simplified, but still at a glance, you can see if the information is good, is sound in the spreadsheet. You see at a glance, how busy am I as a firm, and what kind of action do I need to take? That brings me to the end of my presentation. Let me know if you have questions, what kind of questions you have. More than happy to engage in a conversation or go into, I often do case studies in my presentations, but since it's a short one, I decided it's more lecture style today. But I can also, if you want to, bring some examples if that's more helpful.
I just wanted to ask everyone if the utilization part that Elisabeth presented, was that clear enough? Does anyone feel like they want to go over again really quickly?
I thought it was clear.
Pretty understandable. Great. Mm-hmm. I did have one question, Elisabeth. You were referencing, I think, and I can't remember on which slide, but it was about the 1.0.
The build to spend.
Yeah, can you just briefly just explain that one more time?
Absolutely, I'll go back to it right now. I did not bring any charts with me for that one, unfortunately, I realized. So what it means is, if you have clients, I mean, I know your firm is doing mostly residential work and you are most likely paid hourly to a large extent, which means
it's about 50-50 for us, Elisabeth.
Good to know. Good, thank you. Thank you for letting me know. If you work hourly, it's not an issue, because typically if you spend the hour and the work is good, you bill it to your clients. However, what I do see often, even with residential firms, in my experience, is that, okay, you have a mix of skills on your team. You have some junior level staff on your team that are just learning some basics, and you may decide at the end of the month, you see the number of hours on the timesheet record, and say, no, I cannot bill that to my client. I mean, that doesn't make sense. So you feel like guilty for billing something that you feel like should have been done in less hours, and you may decide to not bill that, which will impact this build to spend ratio, because the hours were spent but you are not billing them to your client. So you bill basically a lower number than you spend. Whereas if you feel like this is perfect, every hour that my team member has produced are great, I am able to bill them to my client, you will have a 1.0 build to spend ratio. And that produces in itself profit, because the billing rate, I mean, I did not go into billing rates. Okay, I can do a whole lecture about billing rates and how they come together and what's the mechanics and the thinking behind billing rates. But somebody in your firm decided that for 2022, there's a certain level for each rank of a billing rate. And that is based on a multiplier applied to the cost rate. Each one of you has a salary level that is competitive in the market. If you divide that salary by 2,080 hours, that's the cost rate per hour. And then you multiply it by a NEM rate, what is typically, that includes a certain profit level. Break even is, okay, I did mention earlier on, there was the firms look at break-even rates on the higher level, firm owners and whoever is involved in financial management. So they know what their break-even rate is, which means the break-even rate is a ratio that defines how much of your direct labor cost is kind of compared to the overall operation. How much is how good is your direct labor cost relating to the overall operating expenses? Most firms probably, I would take a guess that your firm's break-even rate is somewhere between 2.5 and 3.0, meaning to establish a billing rate with a certain percentage of profit, you take that 2.5 plus, say, a 25% profit, that brings that 2.5 up to somewhere 2.9 or so. And you take a cost rate and multiply that by 2.9, that gives you the minimum billing rate that you should establish. If you bill everything at that billing rate, you make that profit that you have built into the billing rate. Meaning, if you do a 1.0 and above on the build to spend, you generate that profit. Does that make sense?
Yes. A little confusing, but yeah. I mean, I do get how to get to the break even and the bill rates. So
good.
Yeah.
I mean, I find it very interesting, and that's something. The staffing spreadsheet, by the way, that I showed you has actually a tab that generates automatically what I showed you, the kind of billing potential. So by the time you list every staff member with their billing rate and a target utilization, there's a simple formula that just says, well, this staff member generates X in potential revenues per year. And you can divide it by 12, and that's the monthly kind of target billing that the firm should produce with keeping everybody busy. At a reasonable level, though. I mean, yes. Yeah.
And then how do you get that factor above 1.0? Is that if you like bill a 50% CD milestone, even though you didn't actually spend 50% of the fee that you stipulated?
That's a good question. So even if you're in a fixed fee scenario, you will probably get, as a project manager, the hour breakdown when it comes to billing. You get a draft invoice where you can say, I want to bill up to 50% CD, and you get a backup how many hours were actually billed towards the project. And that's when you compare just the hours billed, the hours spent, meaning billed to the project on the timesheets, is that amount equivalent to what the 50% billing would be? If that amount is not at the same level, then you're again not at the 1.0 or above ratio. Do you follow me?
Yeah.
So it's a little mathematic. I mean, usually you do it in a spreadsheet that you can track that easily. Well, you just make sure that whatever billing you do for the month on a percent completeness covers the labor you spent based on billing rates and number of hours billed to the project. It's very dry matter for that time of the day. I'm fully aware of that. I can get excited about it, but that's me. So yeah. But I hope at least you can follow the logic and the explanations that I'm giving. All right. Well, I mean, you can always follow up with me if questions come later at another point. Don't want to hold you up if you feel like this gave you a good sense or like a brief introduction to, again, revisiting project management and the numerics behind it. Feel free to reach out to me when you have more questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Elisabeth. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Have a
you.
great
Thanks.
rest of the afternoon. Take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
take care. Bye-bye.